In 2009, Amanita Design released Machinarium, a puzzle adventure game set in a world populated entirely by robots. There are no humans, and apart from plants, there's no organic life, just machines. And yet, within minutes of playing, something remarkable happens. We begin to care about these mechanical beings. We even care about Yosef, our main character. We even go so far as to see them as male and female, rich and poor, or victim and hero. We project onto them the entire architecture of human society, given their behavior, their that we cannot help but humanize it, even when it is obviously artificial. Through its silent protagonist, Yosef, and his journey to rescue his implied girlfriend, Berta, the game becomes a mirror, reflecting back the social constructs we impose on everything we encounter, including machines that should, by all logic, exist outside human categories of gender and class. And so I present the first part of my argument, our anthropomorphic impulse. Before we examine what Machinarium reveals about gender and class, I'd like to dive into why we anthropomorphize the media we consume and the machines we build. This tendency to see human qualities in non human entities is very old and apparently irresistible. The philosopher David Hume wrote in his Natural History of Religion that humans have, quote, a universal tendency among mankind to conceive all beings like themselves. For Hume, anthropomorphism stems from our inability to comprehend things fundamentally unlike us. We project humanity onto gods, for example, animals, and now onto machines. Sigmund Freud took this further, arguing that anthropomorphism serves a psychological need. It makes the unfamiliar manageable, the threatening less frightening. For example, in Totem and Taboo, Freud suggests that we project our own qualities onto external objects as a way of establishing connection and control. This isn't merely theoretical. There have been recent examples even, like NASA's Mars rover. When it stopped responding in 2018, people genuinely mourned, social media filled with tributes even on Twitter, because NASA had regularly tweeted from the rover's perspective, including having it, quote, sing happy birthday to itself each year. We, as humans, knew that the Mars rover was a machine, yet we had this personal and emotional connection or investment in this machine because we designed it to portray human attributes. To add on to this, research published in 2014 found that when people gave names to autonomous vehicles, they were significantly less likely to blame those vehicles for accidents. Once the car had a name, it felt wrong to be angry at it. The machine had become, in some sense, a social being. This is the cognitive framework that we bring to Machinarium. The game succeeds because it activates a deeply human tendency, and it makes visible exactly what we're projecting onto these mechanical bodies. With this context, we dive into part two, how Machinarium performs gender in machines as an example of anthropomorphism and our projection of human qualities on artificial bodies. Let's examine the two main subjects, Berta and Joseph. Both of them are robots. They have no sex and no reproductive organs or any hormones or chromosomes. And yet, from the moment we see them, we code them as male and female. If we examine the visual language, Berta's body features softer curves, a more rounded head, and even eyelashes, which are completely unnecessary for a robot. She has what we might call a more delicate frame. Joseph is more angular, he has less round edges, and although he is cute, he's blocky and built like an industrial sort of robot. Here's where our projection becomes obvious. He looks like a working man, and Berta looks like a girl. His body suggests labors, and hers suggests femininity as we've constructed it. The labor we associate with masculinity in turn. Judith Butler argues in Gender Trouble that gender is not something we are, but something we do. Butler writes that gender is, quote, an identity tenuously constituted in time, instituted in an exterior space through a stylized repetition of acts, end quote. Machinarium's robots perform gender through these very repetitions. Berta doesn't just look feminine, she acts feminine according to deeply ingrained cultural scripts. She is kidnapped, for example, made helpless, and positioned as the prize to be rescued, a common trope in many, many stories across cultures. Even her giggle, one of the few audio cues in the game, is higher pitched or cuter sounding in Yosef's memories. This reinforces her as an object of affection or emotion rather than an agent of action, like Yosef is, given he is the protagonist and the hero and he solves all of the puzzles. We do, but we play as a masculine robot. Joseph, meanwhile, performs masculinity. He represents the hero's journey. He actively rescues Berta, or tries to, depending on your skills in the game. The problem solver, who overcomes obstacles through determination and ingenuity. His journey is external and public. We observe it, proving his worth through all of his actions. We don't see how Berta is kidnapped, and we only get to play as her for 1 to 2 minutes. She is there as an object of help. She aids Joseph. She does not continue the story. Here's what's remarkable. None of this is necessary for the game to function. Machinarium could have featured robots of identical design, solving puzzles together. Joseph didn't need to be blocky or lower pitched than Berta. He could have just been a blob. Berta didn't need to have eyelashes. But that's not the story that Machinarium tells, because it's not a story that would be as accepted socially. We need these gender markers because, as Butler argues, we've learned to read gender into everything. This social construct is one of the many ways we anthropomorphize our machines. We humanize them. The game's wordless storytelling relies entirely on visual cues that trigger our learned associations. These are not neutral design choices, they're the repetition of acts that constitute gender performance, now transferred onto beings that should exist outside such categories entirely. The emotional investment we develop in Yosef's quest depends entirely on accepting these projected meanings. We care about saving Berta not because she's a unique consciousness or we love her genuinely as the player, but because we've been trained to care about stories where men save women, where masculine action protects this feminine passivity. Now we move on to part 3, how we project class hierarchies into the machine world. If Machinarium makes us project gender onto robots, it does something equally revealing with class. This mechanical society has rich and poor, powerful and marginalized, law enforcement and criminals. It even has borders. How do machines develop class consciousness? The answer is machines don't develop class consciousness. We do it for them. We design them in that way. Yosef begins the game quite literally as trash, dumped in the junkyard, discarded, and needing to reassemble himself from scrap. His class position is clearly shown, marked on his body, before he even takes a single action. Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish examines how bodies become sites of power relations and social categorization. Foucault argues that power operates by marking bodies, by making social position visible. He writes that discipline, quote, makes individuals. It is the specific technique of a power that regards individuals both as objects and instruments of its exercise. In Machinarium, we see this disciplinary power inscribed onto the mechanical bodies. The police robots, who guard the city's entrance, don't just enforce rules, their very design signifies authority. They're larger, more imposing, positioned literally above Yosef in the beginning of the game, and hierarchically. They enter spaces that Yosef can't initially enter, like the bar. The Black Cat Brotherhood represents a criminal underclass. These aren't just antagonists, they're marked as lower class criminals through visual signifiers that we can immediately recognize. They wear darker colors, they have aggressive postures or imposing figures, and they occupy more seedy spaces. They're machines, but they perform a role of a more urban gang. Meanwhile, other robots occupy positions of privilege. Their spaces are cleaner, more organized, or aesthetically refined. Their plants aren't overgrown, they're taken care of, for example. The game naturalizes this inequality without any explanation. Quite literally, the higher you go in the city, the fancier the spaces get, like in the elevator. This leads to a question of why are some robots wealthy and others poor if they're designed by humans and not in need of any currency? Why does a society of machines have a class system at all if they're all machines? The answer, of course, for the purpose of the game, is that we, as humans, need them to. We can't conceive of a society, we cannot relate to a society, even a mechanical one, without there being hierarchy. Foucault's insight is that these hierarchies aren't imposed from outside, but are reproduced through everyday interactions, through spatial arrangements, like the city, and through the organization of bodies and space. Joseph himself must labor to progress, solving problems for others, often receiving pretty little in return. The game recreates capitalist relations among beings that have no need for capital. When Yosef is in prison, we see the ultimate expression of Foucault's disciplinary society. The body is controlled. Yosef's movement is restricted and subjected to institutional power. That this happens to a robot makes visible what Foucault argues, that discipline operates on bodies regardless of what those bodies are. Humans, in creating something new, like a machine, have not strayed from our standards, our ideas. In Machinarium, we do not imagine a world made new by machines. We imagine a world that repeats human cycles in what could be an entirely separate species. Perhaps most remarkably, Machinarium makes us believe these robots can feel. Joseph appears joyful in the memories of Berta. We read emotion into mechanical gestures. He even goes so far as to dance when music is playing. We read into Yosef's tilt of his head or the slump of his steel shoulders. This is anthropomorphism at its most powerful. The game provides no dialogue, no explicit confirmation of inner life, yet we supply it automatically. How is it that a robot can reminisce? It's not being asked to or controlled. He begins to imagine, to remember his relationship with Berta, even how he was bullied in childhood. It's foreign for a robot to have a childhood, but not for a human to have a childhood. And so we can relate to Joseph because he is humanized. Freud would recognize this as a projection in its purest form. We cannot tolerate the idea of consciousness without emotion, so we project our emotional life onto anything that seems to act with purpose. Even ChatGPT, without needing to or being asked to, has been trained to complement its user. The robots of Machinarium don't need emotions to function as game characters. The puzzles can be solved regardless of if Yosef is mad, but we need them to have emotions for us to care, for us to continue solving the puzzles ourselves or playing the game. Here's where the game's design becomes brilliant. Many puzzles themselves are solvable without emotion, but we solve them because we can identify what other robots want. A robot, for example, wants oil. Another wants to listen to music. These aren't program directives, they're desires, preferences, and personality traits. We solve the puzzles by treating robots as beings with interior lives, and we would not if we didn't know they had needs or emotional necessities. One robot needs music to be able to help Yosef even. This emotional investment serves the game's narrative, but it also reveals something about our relationship with technology more broadly. We're not just using these robots as tools to solve puzzles, we're engaging with them as social beings, reading intention and feeling into their actions. I personally empathize with Yosef. I felt bad for him when he was dumped, and I felt bad for him when he would remember how he was bullied. So, why does it matter that we project gender, class, and emotion onto fictional and impersonal robots in a video game? Because we're doing this constantly with increasingly sophisticated technologies, every time we say, "Hey Alexa" or "Hey Siri," we're even gendering AI. Every time we design a service robot with a friendly appearance, we're creating class categories for machines. Every time we name our Roomba, we're anthropomorphizing. It's important to observe that Siri, for example, is defaulted to a female voice, and Siri's purpose is to answer questions to serve its user. Siri, a female coded piece of technology, is made familiar through her coding. Again, us being less likely to blame a named car for an accident has important implications for regulation, for our liability, and how we design accountability systems around AI. Our tendency to anthropomorphize affects our ethical frameworks. Machinarium could potentially put us in a position where we empathize or we love a robot. Is it okay for that to happen in real life? Is it okay that human beings are having relationships with technology? The fact that most AI assistants are given female voices and names, and often programmed to respond submissively to harsh language, isn't accidental. It reproduces the gender hierarchies that Machinarium makes visible. We're not just projecting gender onto machines, we're building that gender into them, then naturalizing it through repeated interaction. Machinarium exemplifies this happening. We play a part in it as well as we play. Similarly, when we design robots for service roles versus authority roles, or when we create aesthetic distinctions between worker robots and management systems, we're inscribing class relationships onto the technology itself. Foucault's analysis on how bodies become marked by power becomes literal when we physically design machines to occupy social positions. As we develop more sophisticated AI in robotics, these projections will intensify. Care robots for the elderly will be designed to seem nurturing and likely coded feminine, as previous patterns have revealed. Security robots will be imposing, likely coded masculine. Service robots will look different from robots designed for executive functions. We're building a mechanical society that mirrors our own hierarchies. We're nearing almost machinarium. Amanita Design in 2009 predicted how we are designing the technology they didn't have today. Machinarium succeeds as a game because it understands something about us. We cannot encounter the world, even a mechanical world, without imposing human meaning onto it. The game doesn't just allow this projection, it depends on it, and it designs for it, making it visible. Our motivations in the game, our desire to keep playing, lay in the emotional, not the technological. But it's not easy to say that both are separate anymore, given our modern technologies. By creating a world where the imposition of gender and class onto machines becomes undeniable, Machinarium reveals the interpretive frameworks we bring to all technology. We see what we're trained to see, masculine and feminine, rich and poor. We see emotional depth in metal faces. As we build increasingly sophisticated machines, and as AI becomes more present in our lives, understanding this tendency becomes crucial. We're not just designing technology, we're designing the social beings we'll inevitably perceive through those technologies. Machinarium shows us that this process is already underway and has already been underway, inscribed in every interaction between humans and machines that we cannot help but humanize in order to familiarize.
Thank you so much for watching. Machinarium is one of my favorite games of all time. Um, and as a note, I'd like to add I know the video is shorter than 15 minutes, but I did have to speed up the audio around double because that was around 25 minutes of speech in total. So I hope it's okay that there's around 14 minutes of content only. Um, but yeah, thank you so much. It's been an amazing semester.